The grand concert hall was filled with excitement that evening. Soft golden lights shone from the chandeliers above, reflecting on the polished wooden floor. People from all walks of life had gathered there, dressed in elegant clothes, waiting to see a world-famous pianist perform. For many in the audience, it was not just an ordinary concert. It was an event that promised beauty, culture, and an unforgettable memory. The name of the pianist was known across countries, and his skill had earned him respect in the world of classical music. To be in the same hall as him was already considered a privilege. Among the many people who had bought tickets, one woman stood out not because she was dressed grandly but because she was not. While others wore silk gowns and tailored suits, she wore a simple dress. Her hair was neatly tied back, and her shoes looked worn compared to the polished shoes around her. She was not a regular attendee of such high-class events, but through a friend's kindness, she had received a ticket. She had come not with the intention of impressing anyone but to enjoy a night of music, something she had always loved but could rarely experience live. The concert began with thunderous applause as the pianist walked onto the stage. He was greeted with admiration and respect. His reputation was so strong that even his entrance felt like part of the performance. He bowed slightly, sat at the grand piano, and began to play. His fingers danced across the keys with such speed and grace that the audience held their breath. Every note carried emotion, from the soft whispers of gentle melodies to the powerful storms of dramatic passages. The music filled the hall, carrying everyone into a world beyond their ordinary lives. The woman listened with wide eyes. She admired how effortlessly the pianist controlled the instrument, but deep inside, she felt something different from the rest of the crowd. While most were simply impressed, she felt connected to the music. She remembered how, as a little girl, she had once sat at a small upright piano in her uncle's home, pressing the keys carefully, trying to learn tunes by ear. She had never studied seriously because life had demanded her attention elsewhere: family responsibilities, work, and survival. Yet, the love for music had never left her heart. Hearing the pianist now brought back memories of those times when music was her secret world. As the performance continued, the pianist finished one piece and introduced another. The audience applauded after every number, delighted with his mastery. Then, during a short pause, something unusual happened. The pianist, smiling warmly, looked at the audience and made a light-hearted comment. He said he wanted to try something different, to bring some humor to the evening. His eyes wandered through the crowd until they stopped on the modestly dressed woman in the second row. With a playful tone, he invited her to come up and play the piano for everyone. At first, people laughed. They thought it was just a harmless joke, a way for the pianist to lighten the mood between serious performances. After all, no one expected a random member of the audience, especially someone who looked so ordinary, to know anything about playing the piano. Some even whispered to each other, smiling at the thought of how funny it would be to see her press a few random notes. The woman, however, froze in her seat. She looked around, unsure if he was really talking to her. The spotlight above the stage made her feel exposed, as dozens of eyes turned toward her. Her heart beat faster, and her first instinct was to shake her head politely and decline. She did not want to embarrass herself in front of so many people. But the pianist, still smiling kindly, encouraged her again, raising his hand as if to say, "Come, don't be afraid." The people around her also began to clap lightly, urging her to go. Some clapped because they genuinely wanted to see what would happen, while others clapped just for the fun of it. Slowly, hesitantly, the woman stood. Her steps toward the stage felt heavy. She walked carefully, her hands trembling slightly, not knowing whether she was making a mistake by accepting the invitation. As she climbed the short stairs to the stage, the pianist stepped aside with a playful gesture, offering her the bench in front of the grand piano. The instrument looked enormous up close, shining under the lights, its lid open to let the sound travel across the hall. The woman stood for a moment, unsure whether to laugh it off and return to her seat, or to sit down and press a key or two just to entertain the crowd. The audience chuckled softly, waiting. The atmosphere was filled with a mix of curiosity and amusement. Some whispered that it would be over in seconds. Others leaned forward, eager to see what would happen. The pianist himself crossed his arms, smiling as if he was waiting for a small, funny surprise. The woman finally sat down, adjusting herself on the bench. She placed her hands on her lap for a moment, closing her eyes as if to gather courage. Memories of her childhood returned once again, of sitting alone at her uncle's piano, of trying to match tunes she had heard, of finding peace in the music. Though she had not touched a real piano for many years, her heart had never forgotten the feeling. When her fingers slowly moved toward the keys, the hall grew quiet. The audience was prepared for clumsy sounds, perhaps even laughter. No one expected anything remarkable. Yet, the woman herself felt a strange calm. She took a deep breath and pressed a key. The sound was pure, resonant, and it reminded her of everything she once loved. She pressed another, then another, stringing them together into a simple melody she had carried in her heart for decades. The first few notes were soft, uncertain, almost shy. The crowd still thought it was part of the joke. But there was something different about the way she touched the keys. There was intention, care, and a hidden knowledge of sound. The pianist, standing beside her, tilted his head, sensing something unusual. No one in that room could have guessed that what was about to unfold would turn the evening into an unforgettable memory. The hall was silent as the woman's fingers rested on the keys. At first, her touch was hesitant, almost like she was afraid of breaking the silence. The audience leaned in, expecting random notes that would bring a little laughter before the concert continued. But the first sound that came from the piano was not clumsy. It was soft, clear, and filled with feeling. It caught people off guard, though many still thought it was just luck, perhaps a coincidence that the first note had sounded so pleasant. The woman did not rush. She pressed another key, then a third, forming a short phrase that blended smoothly. For her, the piano was not a stranger. Her hands had not forgotten what they once knew. Although many years had passed since she had played, the old habit returned like an old friend. Her body remembered what her mind doubted. Slowly, a gentle melody began to take shape under her hands. The people who had been chuckling a moment ago now shifted in their seats. The whispers faded as they realized she was not simply striking random notes. There was structure in the way she played, something intentional. The pianist, standing nearby, leaned a little closer. His eyes narrowed slightly in surprise, as if he was beginning to sense that this moment might not end the way he expected. The woman herself felt as though she was stepping back into a world she had locked away long ago. When she was younger, she had never owned a piano, but she had borrowed moments at her uncle's house, where a small upright piano sat near the window. She remembered sneaking to it when no one was around, her little fingers pressing keys until they matched a tune she had in her head. Those stolen hours had been her secret joy. Life, however, had taken her far from that joy. She had to work hard to help her family, then later to raise her children. Music was always in her heart, but there had never been space or time to bring it into her daily life. Now, sitting in front of this grand piano, her heart felt like it had been opened again. The melody grew stronger. She moved from one phrase to the next with confidence she did not know she still had. The audience was quiet, their earlier amusement gone. They were beginning to feel something different, something stirring inside them. The sound of the grand piano, under her touch, filled the hall with a gentle beauty that seemed impossible only moments before. At first, a few people in the crowd smiled politely, thinking perhaps she had memorized a simple tune. But as she continued, the music deepened. She began weaving notes together with both hands, her fingers moving more freely, building harmonies and patterns that were clearly beyond the reach of a beginner. The famous pianist, still standing near her, crossed his arms but now with an expression of genuine interest. He tilted his head, listening closely. This was no accident. This woman knew what she was doing. The woman herself was no longer thinking about the crowd. In her mind, she was no longer in the glittering hall filled with strangers. She was back in her youth, sitting in front of that small piano, feeling the sunlight on her face through the window, letting her heart speak through music. Each note was a memory, each chord a reminder of something she once loved but had set aside. She played not to impress anyone but because the music was alive in her, and now it had found a way out. The silence of the audience was powerful. You could almost hear people's breathing as they waited for each new phrase. The laughter and amusement from earlier had disappeared completely, replaced by awe. Couples who had been whispering to each other now sat still. Even those who did not understand classical music could feel something special was happening. The sound touched them in ways words could not explain. The woman's hands grew more confident as she played. Her body moved slightly with the rhythm, not in a showy way but in a natural flow, as though the music itself was guiding her. There was no fear in her expression now. Instead, her face showed calm, focus, and a quiet kind of joy. The pianist who had invited her in jest now looked at her with new respect. At first, he had thought it would be a playful joke, a light moment for the audience. But as he listened, he felt humbled. Her playing carried a depth that was rare, a raw honesty that even trained musicians sometimes lost. He realized that she was not performing for applause. She was simply expressing herself, and that made the music even more powerful. Some members of the audience were moved more deeply than they expected. An older man in the back wiped his eyes without even realizing it. A young student who had come to learn from the great pianist suddenly felt inspired, realizing that true talent was not always on a stage. Even a woman in the balcony who knew little about piano felt goosebumps rise on her arms as the notes echoed through the hall. The melody the woman chose was not one that anyone recognized. It was not a famous composition but something personal, perhaps a piece she had once invented as a young girl or a tune she carried inside her for years. That made it even more special. It was her story, told through sound. Minutes passed, though no one in the audience noticed the time. The woman continued with patience, never rushing, letting every phrase breathe. She had not prepared for this. She had not planned to sit at the piano that night. Yet here she was, sharing something so beautiful that it left everyone speechless. As she neared the end of her playing, her hands slowed. The music softened, almost like a whisper. She let the final chord linger in the air, allowing it to fade naturally into silence. For a moment, the hall was completely still. No one clapped right away. They were too caught in the magic of what they had just heard. The woman slowly lifted her hands from the keys, her heart racing but also calm. She looked down, almost shyly, realizing where she was. She had been so lost in the music that she had forgotten about the hundreds of eyes watching her. When she finally turned her head slightly, she saw the famous pianist looking at her not with a smile of amusement anymore, but with admiration. The audience finally erupted into applause, breaking the silence that had hung in the air. It was not polite clapping, it was loud, sincere, and filled with energy. People rose to their feet, giving her a standing ovation. The sound of hands coming together echoed as strongly as the music had. Some people even whistled and cheered, unable to hold back their excitement. The woman sat still for a moment, overwhelmed. She had never imagined such a response. She had come to the concert simply to listen, never dreaming that she would be the one on stage. Now, she sat before a roaring crowd, their faces lit with respect and wonder. The pianist stepped forward and gently bowed his head toward her, acknowledging what everyone had just witnessed. He extended his hand to help her up, not as a joke this time but as a gesture of genuine honor. The woman, still modest and unsure of what to do, accepted his hand and stood. She bowed lightly to the crowd, her cheeks warm with embarrassment but her heart glowing with something she had not felt in years. That single moment had changed everything. The audience had come to see a famous pianist perform, but now they had witnessed something far more extraordinary, the discovery of hidden talent that had been sitting quietly among them all along. The applause seemed to go on and on, echoing through the great hall. The woman, still standing near the piano, looked down at her hands as if she herself could not believe what had just happened. She had walked to the stage in fear, expecting embarrassment, but instead, she had played from her heart and touched the souls of hundreds of strangers. The sound of the audience clapping, cheering, and rising to their feet filled her with both joy and disbelief. The famous pianist stepped closer, smiling warmly now. His earlier playful expression had changed into something far more serious: respect, admiration, even awe. He gently placed his hand on his chest and bowed slightly to her, a gesture that made the audience cheer even louder. For him, this was not a moment of competition but a lesson, a reminder that true music could come from anywhere, even from someone overlooked and ordinary. When the clapping finally softened, the woman made a small movement toward the piano again. Perhaps she wanted to finish what she had begun, or maybe she felt a sudden boldness from the encouragement of the crowd. She placed her hands back on the keys, and immediately, silence fell once more. It was as though everyone had been waiting for her to continue. The audience leaned forward, eager to see if what they had heard earlier was real or just a moment of luck. This time, she did not hesitate. Her fingers moved more confidently, flowing over the keys with ease. She began to play a new melody, one that was richer, fuller, and far more complex than the first. The notes rose like waves, filling the hall with energy. Her left hand created strong rhythms while her right hand painted beautiful phrases that soared above. It was clear now this woman was not just someone who knew a little music. She was an artist in her own right, one who had been hidden away by life's circumstances. The hall transformed into a world of sound. People forgot they were sitting on velvet seats under golden lights. They felt transported into the landscapes she painted with her music. Some imagined rivers flowing, others saw mountains rising, while others simply closed their eyes and allowed the emotions to wash over them. The power of her playing was not in its perfection. She was not polished like someone who practiced 8 hours every day, but in its honesty. Every note she touched carried her story, her joys, her struggles, and her dreams that had never come true. That raw honesty struck people more deeply than flawless technique ever could. The famous pianist, standing just a step behind her, watched with wide eyes. He had heard thousands of performances in his lifetime. He had trained, practiced, and studied under great masters. Yet this woman, with no stage training, no fame, and no preparation, was moving the crowd in a way even he rarely achieved. It humbled him. He began to wonder about her life. Who was she? Why had such talent been hidden? What path had kept her away from stages like this? The woman herself seemed lost in the music. She swayed slightly as she played, not with exaggerated movement but with the natural rhythm of someone deeply connected to what they were creating. She was not thinking about the crowd, not about the pianist, not even about the lights and the hall. She was only thinking about the sound, letting her fingers carry the emotions she could never put into words. Minutes passed, though no one counted. The piece she played shifted in mood. At one moment, it was bright and hopeful, almost like a dance. The next, it grew soft and thoughtful, like a memory that brought both sadness and comfort. The contrast made the audience lean even closer, waiting for what would come next. The woman had unknowingly created a journey for everyone listening, guiding them through feelings they didn't even know they carried. In one corner of the hall, a young girl who had been taking piano lessons squeezed her mother's hand. She whispered that she wanted to play like the lady on stage, not just to learn notes but to play with her heart. In another row, an older man thought about his own youth, when he too had once dreamed of being a musician but had given it up for a practical life. The music brought back those forgotten dreams, filling him with both regret and inspiration. The power of art is not only in skill but in connection. That evening, the simple woman connected everyone in that hall through her music. They did not share the same lives, the same problems, or the same hopes, but in that moment, they all shared the same feeling, carried together by her notes. The performance grew more dramatic. Her fingers moved faster now, striking keys with precision and force. The sound grew louder, grander, almost like a storm passing through the hall. Some people held their breath, others clutched the edges of their seats. The energy was overwhelming. Then, as suddenly as it rose, the storm softened. Her hands slowed, the sound melted into calm, and the hall returned to stillness. When she finally reached the last notes, she let them linger, ringing in the air like gentle echoes. She held the chord, then released her hands slowly. The silence that followed was so deep it almost felt like the hall itself was holding its breath. For a long moment, no one moved. Then the applause burst out again, even louder than before. This time, the famous pianist was the first to clap. He clapped with a broad smile, his eyes shining. He even stepped forward, took the woman's hand, and lifted it high for everyone to see, just as one might do for a true star performer. The audience cheered wildly, many standing on their feet once again. The woman looked shocked, overwhelmed, but also deeply touched. She lowered her head in gratitude, unsure of how to handle the spotlight. She was not used to attention, and all of this felt like a dream. Yet the cheers made her realize something important: she had given people a gift, and they were giving her their gratitude in return. The famous pianist leaned closer and said a few quiet words to her that only she could hear. His tone was gentle, respectful, and encouraging. Whatever he said made her eyes widen slightly, then soften with emotion. She nodded, though she still looked shy and uncertain. The evening, which had begun as a formal concert with a world-renowned musician, had now turned into something far greater. It was no longer just about the brilliance of one man but about the unexpected discovery of another soul who carried music within her. The audience had not come expecting to see such a moment, but now, they knew they had witnessed something rare, something unforgettable. As the woman slowly stepped away from the piano, guided by the famous pianist, the crowd continued to applaud. She walked back toward her seat, but everyone turned their heads to follow her with their eyes, clapping for her just as much as they had for the master pianist. She sat down, her face glowing, her heart racing, still unsure if it had all been real. The pianist returned to the bench, but before beginning his next prepared piece, he paused. He looked at the audience, then back at the woman, and gave a small bow in her direction. The hall responded with cheers again. It was clear he wanted everyone to understand that what had just happened was not small, it was something worth remembering. That night, as the concert continued, people whispered to each other about the woman. Some guessed she had been secretly trained. Others wondered if she had once been a musician who gave it up. Nobody knew the truth, but one thing was certain: she had played in a way that touched them all. And deep inside, the woman sat quietly, her heart still trembling, realizing that something long buried in her had just come alive again. The applause had finally softened, but the memory of the woman's playing still lingered in every corner of the hall. People looked at each other, shaking their heads in disbelief, smiling as if they had shared a secret miracle. No one had expected this. They had come to watch a famous pianist, but now they could not stop talking about the simple woman who had stepped onto the stage as if by accident and left them all speechless. The pianist sat back down at the bench, but his mind was not entirely on his prepared program. He had spent his life performing in front of thousands, practicing endlessly, and achieving worldwide fame. Yet, tonight, a woman who had lived outside of the spotlight, who wore no fancy clothes and carried no name known to the world, had moved the audience in a way he had rarely seen. It humbled him, and in that humility, he found a deep respect for her. Before he began his next piece, He turned to the microphone again. His voice was calm but full of sincerity. He thanked the audience for their love and applause, but then he did something unusual. He pointed to the woman sitting quietly in her seat, still red with embarrassment, and told the crowd that what she had just shared was one of the most beautiful moments he had witnessed in his career. His words drew more clapping and cheers, and the woman lowered her head, wishing she could disappear into her seat, but also unable to stop smiling. People around her began whispering to her, praising her, asking questions. "Who are you? Where did you learn to play like that? Why have we never heard of you before?" She answered only with shy smiles and small nods. She was not someone used to attention, and the flood of curiosity overwhelmed her. She had simply played because she felt the music rise in her heart. She had not meant to impress anyone, only to express what she had carried silently for so long. The concert continued, but the atmosphere was different now. Each time the pianist played, people still admired his skill, but they could not help glancing toward the woman, their minds replaying her melodies. Even he himself seemed to play differently, with more softness, more humility, as though her honesty had reminded him of something he had forgotten during his years of fame. When the final bow was taken, the audience left the hall buzzing with conversation. Many people forgot to talk about the famous pianist's flawless program. Instead, they spoke about the simple woman, the way her fingers had moved, the way her music had made them feel. It was as if a star had appeared out of nowhere and then quietly returned to the shadows, leaving them in awe. As she walked out with the crowd, a few people stopped her to shake her hand. Some even asked if she taught music, if she would consider giving lessons, or if she had ever performed before. She laughed nervously, shaking her head. She explained softly that she was not a professional, that she had only learned a little when she was young and had no chance to study further. Most could hardly believe her words. They thought she was being modest, but the truth was that life had never given her the chance to pursue her gift. That night, when she returned home, she sat quietly on her small bed, thinking about everything that had happened. She replayed the moment when the pianist had jokingly called her to the stage, the nervous walk she had taken under the spotlight, and the way her hands had trembled before touching the keys. She thought about the faces in the audience, the silence when they listened, the tears she had noticed in some eyes, and the thunderous applause that had followed. Her heart swelled with emotions she could not easily describe. For the first time in many years, she felt proud of herself, not for recognition, not for applause, but because she had dared to share her hidden love for music. The next morning, the story began to spread. A few people who had attended the concert told their families and friends. By afternoon, small articles appeared online, describing the unusual event. "Famous pianist invites audience member, what happened shocked everyone," one headline read. People clicked on it with curiosity, and soon the story traveled far beyond the walls of the concert hall. Some described her as a hidden genius, others as a woman with natural talent. Many wrote about the humility of the famous pianist, who had bowed to her in respect. The story touched people not only because of the surprise but because it reminded them that greatness does not always come with fame or wealth. Sometimes, it sits quietly inside ordinary people, waiting for a moment to shine. The pianist himself was asked about the incident in interviews. Instead of brushing it off as a joke, he spoke about it with honesty. He admitted that he had first invited her as a playful gesture, never expecting anything serious. But when she began to play, he realized that he was witnessing something extraordinary. He said that her music reminded him of why he had fallen in love with the piano in the first place, not for awards, not for recognition, but for the pure emotion that music brings. His words only deepened the respect people felt for both him and the woman. The woman's neighbors, who had known her as a quiet and modest person, were amazed when they read the story. Some knocked on her door, congratulating her, telling her they were proud. Children in the neighborhood looked at her differently, calling her the pianist lady. She felt shy about the attention, but deep down, she was happy that her love for music had finally been seen, even if only for one night. At work, too, people treated her with admiration. Colleagues who had never paid much attention to her now asked her to tell the story again and again. They begged her to play for them someday. She smiled and politely refused, explaining that the concert piano was different, that the moment had been special and could not be repeated just anywhere. The story also reached local music teachers and students. Some wanted to meet her, to learn from her, or simply to hear her play again. Invitations came, but she hesitated. She had lived a life of simplicity, never seeking fame or recognition. The idea of performing again frightened her. Yet, a small part of her heart began to wonder if perhaps it was not too late. The pianist himself reached out privately. He sent her a message, thanking her once more and encouraging her not to let this gift remain hidden. He told her that talent like hers should not be silent, that music like hers could inspire many. His words touched her deeply, though she still did not know what to do. Everywhere she went, people talked about the concert. Strangers who had been in the audience smiled at her on the street. Some stopped her to shake her hand, telling her how her playing had moved them. She listened with humility, always saying thank you, always reminding them she was just an ordinary woman. But inside, her spirit glowed brighter. What surprised her most was how the story inspired others. Parents began encouraging their children to continue with music lessons. Adults who had once given up their instruments picked them up again, saying, "If she could do it, maybe I can too." People began to realize that talent was not limited to stages and fame, but lived quietly in unexpected places. The woman did not seek the spotlight after that night, but she could not deny that something had changed. She had been reminded of a part of herself that she had almost forgotten. The world had seen her gift, and though she returned to her simple life, she now carried with her a quiet confidence, knowing that her love for music had touched countless hearts. And for the audience who had been there that evening, it remained one of the most unforgettable nights of their lives. They had witnessed not only the brilliance of a famous pianist but the astonishing beauty of a hidden talent that had shone brighter than anyone could have imagined. Weeks passed after the concert, but the memory of that night refused to fade. For many people who had been in the hall, it became a story they repeated again and again to their families, friends, and even strangers. "You won't believe what happened," they would begin, and their eyes would light up as they described the simple woman who had surprised the world with her hidden gift. The tale spread far beyond the city, carried by newspapers, online articles, and word of mouth. The woman herself, however, tried to return to her ordinary life. She woke up early each morning, cooked breakfast, went to work, and did her daily tasks as always. But nothing felt quite the same anymore. Her heart carried the weight of the applause, the warmth of the audience's admiration, and the deep respect she had seen in the famous pianist's eyes. That moment had awakened something inside her that she had long buried. At night, she often found herself thinking about the piano. She would close her eyes and remember the way her fingers had touched the keys, the way the music had flowed out of her as though it had been waiting all those years for that exact moment. Sometimes, she hummed the melodies to herself quietly, smiling as if sharing a secret with her own soul. Letters and messages began arriving. Some came from people she knew, others from complete strangers. They thanked her for inspiring them, for reminding them that it is never too late to follow a passion. Some told her they had gone back to playing their instruments after years of silence. Others wrote about how her courage to play in front of everyone gave them strength to face their own fears. Reading these words made her eyes fill with tears. She had never thought her simple act could mean so much to others. One evening, she received an invitation from the concert hall itself. They asked if she would like to play again, perhaps at a smaller event, as a special guest. The idea frightened her. She was not used to stages, and she had no formal training. She worried that people now expected too much from her, that she could never repeat the magic of that first night. She hesitated for days, unsure of what to do. It was the famous pianist who finally gave her courage. He called her personally, his voice kind and encouraging. He told her that talent like hers was rare, that music played from the heart was worth more than years of technical training. He reminded her that she had already touched people in a way many professionals never could. "Do not be afraid," he said gently. "The world needs music like yours." His words stayed with her. She realized that she had been given a gift, and gifts were not meant to be hidden forever. With trembling hands, she finally accepted the invitation. The second time she walked onto a stage, her heart still raced, but it was different now. She was no longer the shy woman who had been chosen as part of a joke. She was someone who had been recognized, respected, and encouraged. The audience, though smaller, greeted her warmly, many of them already knowing her story. Some had come only to hear her play, curious to see if the magic was real. She sat at the piano, closed her eyes, and let her hands find the keys. The first notes filled the room, and once again, silence fell. Her music was not flawless, she made small mistakes, her fingers sometimes slipping. But none of it mattered. What mattered was the emotion, the honesty, the way each sound seemed to come directly from her soul. When she finished, the audience rose to their feet, clapping and cheering just as they had that first night. Tears ran down her cheeks, not because she wanted fame, but because she finally understood that her music had a purpose. From that point on, her life began to change. She did not suddenly become a superstar or live a life of wealth and glamour. She remained the same simple woman, but now her days had something new in them: music. She began practicing again, renting time at a local piano studio when she could. She started teaching a few children in her neighborhood, sharing what she knew with kindness and patience. She encouraged them to play not only with their fingers but with their hearts. The famous pianist stayed in touch with her. Whenever he visited her city, he invited her to attend his concerts. Sometimes, he even asked her to join him for a short piece, and each time, the audience welcomed her with joy. For him, she had become a symbol, a reminder that true beauty in music comes not from perfection but from sincerity. For her, he became a friend and a mentor, someone who had given her the chance to shine when she least expected it. People often asked her why she had never pursued music earlier in life. She would smile softly and explain that life had taken her in other directions. Responsibilities, family, and survival had always come first. But she never spoke with regret. "Perhaps," she would say, "it was meant to happen this way. Maybe if I had played earlier, it would not have touched people the same way it did that night." Years later, the story was still remembered. The famous pianist mentioned it in his memoirs, describing it as one of the most humbling and unforgettable experiences of his career. "That night," he wrote, "I learned that music does not belong to stages or titles. It belongs to the heart. And sometimes, the heart of a simple person holds more music than all the great halls of the world." The woman herself continued to live quietly, never chasing fame, never changing who she was. But whenever she sat at a piano, whether in a hall, a small classroom, or even in her own modest home, she carried with her the memory of that night, the night when her hidden gift was finally seen, the night when the world was reminded that greatness can rise from the simplest of places. And for everyone who heard her play, whether in person or through the story that spread far and wide, it remained an unforgettable lesson, that we should never judge by appearances, that talent and beauty can be found in the most unexpected people, and that sometimes, a single act of courage can touch the hearts of thousands. Her legacy was not in fame or fortune but in inspiration. She reminded people to never give up on their passions, no matter how long they had been hidden. She proved that even if life pulls you away from your dreams, it is never too late for them to find their way back. In the end, the woman remained what she had always been: humble, kind, and simple. But now, when people looked at her, they no longer saw just an ordinary woman. They saw someone who had carried music silently for years and, in one unexpected moment, shared it with the world in a way no one would ever forget.